Chapter 1. A coworker played a prank on me by sticking a fake parking ticket on my windshield and sending me a photo, saying I'd violated traffic rules. I believed it and logged into the traffic app to check. Instead, I saw a high-resolution photo taken by the traffic system yesterday. In the picture, Zack's first love was in the passenger seat, not wearing a seatbelt, leaning over to kiss his cheek. I stared blankly at the bright, genuine smile on his face, one he had never shown me. That's when I finally understood. It was time to let go of this one-sided love. I silently paid the fine, then drove myself to the hospital and had an abortion, alone. Afterward, I drafted the divorce papers and sent them to his company. From now on, mountains will be mountains, and I will be me. My best friend, Celine, was the first to hear the news. She rushed over, breathless. What happened between you and Zack? Did he cheat? I looked up with red, swollen eyes, forcing a smile that looked worse than crying. 10 years of chasing and admiring him, and all I got in return was polite indifference. I thought that was love. But today, a single photo shattered that illusion. Marrying me had always been a compromise for him. Celine stared at my pitiful state, fuming. I told you ages ago, Zack's no good. But you wouldn't listen. You just had to crash into the wall headfirst. It's better this way. Watching you follow him around like a lost puppy used to make me furious. By the way, Mario's got an international project that needs someone. Why don't you consider it? I nodded, the bitterness still in my mouth. That's when I realized my tears had already started falling on their own. Panicking, I looked for tissues, but Celine sighed. Don't hold it in anymore, just cry. And so I did. The injustice, the heartbreak, I couldn't bear it any longer. I clung to her and cried my heart out. After taking me home, she had to leave for something urgent. I called Mario to ask about the project and found that I was more than qualified, so I accepted it without hesitation. Departure was scheduled for a week later. I could handle the company handover online. While washing up, I caught my reflection in the mirror, gaunt and exhausted, like a wilted leaf. For the first time, I hated what I saw. Then, as I drifted in thought, my phone rang. Elise, please bring a black suit to the office for me. Thanks. Hearing Zack's polite tone, I instinctively agreed. It wasn't until after he hung up that I realized something felt off. I hesitated for a moment but, in the end, didn't call back to refuse. Zack was often too busy to come home. Maybe it was better if I delivered the divorce papers myself. When I arrived, I found Roma leaning over beside Zack, both of them staring at the computer screen. Her hair brushed his cheek. He gently tucked a strand behind her ear. His eyes shifted to me, just for a second, and the tenderness disappeared, replaced by indifference. Then came the scolding look. Why are you so late? Roma smiled and tried to soothe him, reaching out to take the suit from my hands. Sorry to trouble you, Junior. Zack's been frustrated with his team today, so his tone might have been a little harsh. Don't take it personally. She spoke like a proper hostess, as if I were the shameless intruder. If this had been back when she first returned from abroad to be Zack's secretary, I might have lost it and demanded an explanation on the spot. But now, I just asked calmly, has he signed the papers? Zack raised an eyebrow, letting Roma help him change clothes. What papers? That's enough. Zack, we're going to be late. Roma interrupted, clearly annoyed by my presence. He nodded slightly and tossed a line over his shoulder. We'll talk at home. The two of them walked out, one after the other. Roma glanced back at me, not even bothering to hide her smug little smile. I looked around his desk, searching for the divorce agreement. It was nowhere to be found. I accidentally moved the mouse, and the screen lit up. There they were, Zack and Roma, leaning against a railing by the sea, gazing into each other's eyes like lovers in a movie. That warmth, that intimacy, it had never been mine. Clutching my bag, I fled the office in a daze. Back home, I crouched behind the door and cried again. Letting go, turns out it's so much harder than I imagined. But it's okay. One day, I'll pull Zack out of my heart, root and all. Trying to distract myself, I scrolled through videos when a people you may know suggestion popped up. I tried to swipe past it, but accidentally tapped it. It was Roma. The most recent video showed her at a funeral, Caption: In dark times, I'm grateful to have you by my side. The deceased was Roma's distant uncle. Zack stood next to her, taking on the role of a devoted partner. Watching him so hands-on in the video, I suddenly realized, so Zack could make time when he cared. And all this time, I thought he was just too busy to stay at our wedding. Back then, he'd left halfway through, saying he had urgent work, with that slightly apologetic, conflicted look in his eyes. I thought he felt guilty. I even comforted him, telling him not to worry. Looking back, it's laughable. Maybe even then, he already regretted marrying me. Chapter 2. That night, Zack, as usual, didn't come home. But the next day, at our university's anniversary celebration, I ran into him. He was holding Roma's hand on stage, the two of them presenting a donation together. Then I heard him say, loud and clear to the host, "Roma is the most important person in my life." In that moment, I felt oddly grateful that we had kept our wedding low profile. At Zack's request, not a single classmate had been invited. Almost as if sensing my presence, Zack turned his head and scanned the crowd. Our eyes met. His brows furrowed slightly, but even so, he didn't let go of Roma's hand. I lowered my head with a bitter smile and walked away, toward the lakeside lawn near Tongshin Lake. Soon, I heard footsteps behind me. "You came to the celebration, why didn't you tell me? I could have picked you up." No mention of Roma, no awkward apology, no guilt for being caught. I let out a mocking laugh. "Would there even be room for me in your car?" Zack rubbed his temples, looking annoyed. "Elise, do you have to be so confrontational? What happened to the thoughtful, understanding you I used to know? The old me? The girl who worshipped him like a savior sent to lift her from despair, who smiled when he smiled, who worried when he frowned, who made him the center of her entire world. I had lost myself in him. No dreams, no goals, only Zack. If he had told me he wanted to be with Roma again, I would have stepped aside without hesitation, because this marriage had only happened after their breakup. A petty move from Zack, meant to spite her. I had seen it all, clear as day, even while I was secretly in love with him. Still, I willingly fell into the trap. Now that their flame had rekindled, shouldn't he be eager to push me aside? But instead, he acted like nothing had happened. I honestly didn't know what to make of it. "Zack, so here you are." Roma walked up in heels, graceful as ever. When she saw me, she looked slightly surprised. "Oh, you're here too, Elise?" She stepped in front of Zack and casually adjusted his collar like she'd done it 100 times. "The school leadership wants a photo with you. Shall we go?" Zack glanced at me, unsure how to respond, worried. He reminded me, "Wait for me later, we'll leave together." Roma smiled sweetly from the side. "You forgot you still have a meeting, didn't you?" "I'm afraid she'll have to take a cab on her own." She glanced at me with what looked like an apologetic smile. Zack hesitated. Then suddenly, Roma let out a scream. "There's a snake!" Zack instantly shoved me aside, crouched down in panic, and scooped Roma up in his arms, rushing her toward the paved path. I was right by the lake's edge, and just like that, he pushed me straight into the water. The summer water of Tongshin Lake should have felt warm, but I felt like I had fallen into ice. The chill pierced through me, deep into my bones. Through the shimmering water, I met Zack's panicked, guilty gaze. He rushed toward me, but I'd already climbed out by myself. "Elise, I'm sorry, I didn't see." I smiled. "It's fine, I'm used to it." Without a second thought, I turned and walked away, soaked to the bone. Zack's fists clenched slightly at his sides. For the first time, he felt like I was slipping away. He wanted to chase after me and ask what was wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to leave Roma. In the end, he just sent me a text. "Go home first. I'll explain everything later." I let out a cold, sarcastic laugh. Explain what? That he protected Roma without hesitation? Or that he shoved me into the lake? Either way, I didn't want to hear it. I was sick of his self-deceiving excuses. That night, with doubts in his heart, Zack came home early, seeing the cold stove, the silence, and me casually ordering takeout. He suddenly felt uneasy. "You take care of yourself like this when I'm not around?" Maybe we should hire a housekeeper again. There's too much to do. I don't want you overworking. It breaks my heart. My hand holding the chopsticks paused for just a second. What a caring, considerate man. He used to say things like that all the time. And I, naive as I was, thought it meant he was falling for me. That's how I became more and more dependent on him. But a lie is still a lie. I wiped my mouth, set my chopsticks down, and said calmly, "Let's get a divorce." Chapter 3. Zack froze for a second. Then he gave a helpless smile, still throwing tantrums. Huh? Roma and I are ancient history. Right now, we're husband and wife. You need to trust your husband. He reached out and patted my head, his tone soft and coaxing. I'm a little hungry. Can you make me something to eat? Like he was offering me an olive branch, but I didn't take it. Make it yourself. Maybe it was the first time I had turned him down like that. He looked a bit thrown off. I didn't want to argue. I sidestepped and tried to head to the bedroom, but he grabbed my arm. Elise, are you feeling unwell? Still gentle, which only made me look more unreasonable. I snapped, no longer caring about appearances. So what if I'm unwell? We've been married for 5 years. Have you ever actually cared? We're married. If I don't care about you, who else would I care about? Fine, then tell me, when's my period? Zack opened his mouth but said nothing. Of course he didn't know. Just like when I was pregnant, when I threw up in front of him multiple times. All he did was casually hand me some antacid. But you know Roma's, don't you? Tears streamed down my face as I looked at him, expecting him to yell, or maybe panic and explain things about Roma. But he didn't. He just let out a long, tired sigh. You need to calm down. I'm working late at the office tonight. There it was again. Every time I tried to argue, he used working late to escape. Zack had mastered the art of emotional neglect under the guise of politeness. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I grabbed the remote and threw it at him. He didn't dodge in time, and it hit the side of his forehead, leaving a red mark. Anger slowly rose in his eyes. Elise, even if you want to be unreasonable, there should be a limit. He slammed the door behind him and left without a trace of emotion. What remained was a suffocating silence, and me, on the verge of breaking down, in a valley with no echo. Shouting again would only leave me more exhausted. I slid down onto the floor, my eyes landing on the wedding photo on the wall. Tears and laughter came all at once. I don't know how long I sat there, in a haze. I suddenly heard the phone ringing. I pressed the answer button and was met with Zack's furious voice. Elise, come and get your best friend under control. Hearing it had something to do with Celine, I immediately hung up and rushed to the Western restaurant. The moment I stepped through the door, I saw Roma clutching her cheek pitifully, nestled in Zack's arms like a wounded dove. Celine was being held back by a waiter, looking like she could tear someone apart. I hurried to her side to calm her down. Zack didn't even glance at me. His face was cold and dark. Celine, don't think I won't touch you just because you're Elise's best friend. Apologize to Roma now. Celine scoffed. Don't you dare accuse me. You cheating piece of trash. If I had slapped her, believe me, I wouldn't have missed the chance. Zack's face turned livid, and he turned his fury toward me. Elise, what nonsense have you been feeding her? I told you Roma and I are just friends. Are you deaf? Neither of you are leaving until you apologize to Roma. Fine, Celine replied, eyes burning. But before that, let the restaurant manager pull the surveillance footage. Her eyes lit up with confidence. Roma's crying grew louder, her sobs shaking. Between gasps, she said, "Forget it, Zack." I didn't expect Elise to misunderstand me this deeply. You should stay away from me from now on. Then she ran out, crying. Zack chased after her in a panic, throwing one last warning over his shoulder. Elise, if anything happens to Roma, I swear, you'll pay for it. My nose stung, eyes lowered. I said nothing. Chapter 4. Celine hugged me tight, heart aching. Babe, want me to go kick him a couple of times? I let out a small laugh. We had dinner together before I went home, but as I reached the doorstep, I saw Zack, drunk, clinging tightly to Roma, refusing to let go. He was mumbling, sounding like a wronged child. Why can't you just be a little more understanding? When he saw me, Roma leaned in and brushed her lips against his. Barely a touch. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were full of provocation. Don't worry. I'll listen to you from now on. If this had been before, I would have snatched Zack away from her and screamed at her for being shameless. But now, I simply took out my keys, unlocked the door, and didn't even glance their way. I let Roma struggle to drag Zack to the sofa all on her own. Once she finished fussing with him, she tried to get up, only to stumble deliberately. With a soft yelp, she fell right on top of him. Zack, still with his eyes closed, instinctively wrapped his arms around her and muttered through his haze. Stop it. Roma let out a squeaky protest. Zack, not like this. Elise might see us. That name triggered something. Zack tightened his grip. Elise? Who's Elise? Then he rolled over and kissed her, full on the mouth. I was in the bedroom, even though I'd already decided to leave. The pain still stabbed like a knife. Zack, did you really have to rush it like this? Fine. That just makes it easier for me to let go. Feeling thirsty, I went to the kitchen with a glass in hand. Soon after, Roma walked in, her clothes wrinkled, her lips slightly swollen. She looked me over with a sneer. No wonder Zack hasn't loved you in 5 years. Look at yourself, so plain and lifeless. If I were you, I'd be too ashamed to live. Then go ahead and bash your head in. I replied coldly, because being a mistress is far more shameful. My voice was full of sarcasm. Her face twisted in fury. She grabbed a full cup of steaming hot water nearby and flung it at me. I raised my hand just in time to shield my face, but most of it splashed down my neck. It burned like fire. I charged forward and slapped her, hard, across the face. I raised my hand to strike again, but this time, my arm was caught. I turned, only to meet Zack's furious, stormy gaze. Then came a sharp crack across my own cheek. The burning pain spread from my neck to my face. Elise, he said coldly, you've truly disappointed me. After that day, Zack disappeared completely. I sold everything I couldn't take with me at the flea market. During that time, I tried calling him to talk about the divorce papers, but he only replied with a cold message. Roma ended up in the hospital because of you. If you can't admit your mistake and apologize sincerely, don't contact me again. On the day of my flight, Celine clung to me, crying her eyes out. I smiled and comforted her, then walked away with big strides toward a brand new future. From now on, the mountain will just be a mountain, and I will just be me. I will live for myself. Before switching off my phone, I sent one last text to Zack. The divorce papers have been sent to your office. Please sign them as soon as possible. Thank you. Chapter 5. Human adaptability is a strange and wonderful thing. Despite flying for over 10 hours, I didn't feel the slightest bit of discomfort. I turned down Mario's offer to pick me up at the airport or escort me to the hotel. I went straight to the project site. He covered his face in mock despair and joked that I was a workaholic warrior. While my phone was dead, I asked him to let Celine know I had arrived safely. It wasn't until I got back to the hotel that I finally plugged in my charger. And in a flash, I was hit by a tidal wave of notifications. Missed calls, messages. Zack had lost his mind trying to reach me. He kept asking what I meant by leaving, why all my belongings had vanished from the house. Roma had also sent me a taunting message, a picture of her pregnancy ultrasound, followed by, I'm pregnant with Zack's child. Be smart and step aside. I hung up as Zack called again, non-stop. Ever since I turned my phone on, then, without hesitation, I created a group chat. I added both of them, dropped the screenshot into the chat, and tagged them. Whatever mess the two of you are in, don't bring it to me. It disgusts me. After sending the message, I exited the group chat. Silence finally returned to my phone, but it didn't last long. Zack kept calling. I finally answered. His voice was shaky, trying hard to sound casual. Elise, it's not what you think. Today's April Fool's Day. Roma was just trying to prank you. Tell me where you are. I'll come pick you up. We'll have dinner. And she'll apologize, okay? I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. Zack, whether it was a joke or not doesn't even matter anymore. How does it not matter? Why do you never trust me? Forget it. This can't be explained over the phone. Just send me your location. No need to bother. Elise. I've taken a job overseas. I'm not coming back. I sent the divorce agreement to your office a week ago. Once you've signed, let me know. My lawyer will collect it. No way. You really left me? You followed me for 5 years, then finally got to marry me, and now you're leaving me over a fake ultrasound photo? A fake ultrasound? I let out a bitter laugh. Zack's nonchalance could really drive someone insane. Stop talking. The divorce is settled. Let's end this cleanly. I'm not signing. If you really don't care about Roma, then I'll keep her away from you. I promise. Elise. I need you. Please come back. He started begging, but I felt nothing. I hung up, expression blank. Then I pulled up the traffic fine photo, and the security footage from the night he came home drunk, with Roma draped all over him. Sent them all to him at once. Let him keep lying if he wanted to. Time would prove my resolve. The phone fell silent again, and peace returned to my world. I thought the photos and video would be enough to make him sign the papers quickly, but I was wrong. The next day, just as I finished work, his call came through again. This time, his voice was filled with panic. Elise. I'm sorry. I didn't know Roma still had feelings for me. I shouldn't have pitted her for being all alone after returning to the country, and made the mistake of keeping her close as my secretary. I've already fired her. Can't you give me another chance? He paused, then asked carefully, with a hint of hope in his voice. I saw the ultrasound photo in your drawer. I'm going to be a dad, right? Please, for the baby's sake, give me a chance to make things right. Just then, someone nearby screamed. A brick fell from above and shattered into pieces right at my feet. One of the fragments cut my calf. The pain was so sharp, it brought tears to my eyes. I whispered into the phone, there's no baby anymore. The day Roma unbuckled her seatbelt to kiss you, that traffic violation day, I had the abortion. On the other end, there was only the sound of Zack's suppressed sobs. I hung up, fed up, rolling up my pants. I saw blood trickling from the gash. Chapter 6. Mario took me to the hospital, when reporting it as a workplace safety incident. I learned something unexpected. My supervisor's boss was someone I knew. Simon, our top student, the heartthrob from college. Now, he was my boss too. The moment he heard I was hurt, he rushed to the hospital, visibly anxious. He didn't relax until everything was properly taken care of. With his lips still tight from worry, he finally said, Elise, why do you always end up like this? I gave him a bitter smile. Maybe I'm just really unlucky. Back then, when I was chasing Zack, I made a complete fool of myself more times than I could count. And somehow, Simon had always been there, stepping in at just the right moment. He frowned deeper, but didn't speak. Once the nurse finished wrapping my wound, Mario's phone rang. His wife was going into labor. I'll take Elise back to the hotel later, Simon said. Mario nodded and left in a hurry. Simon offered me his arm to lean on, carefully helping me into the car. So what made you come all the way out here? He asked. I got tired of life back home. I said lightly, wanted to see what the rest of the world looked like. You sure you could leave your husband behind like that? My expression didn't change. I smiled as I spoke. I'm getting divorced. A subtle flicker flashed through Simon's eyes, almost imperceptible, but he didn't press for more. Instead, he naturally shifted the topic, telling me about the local culture, food, and scenery. Then, almost casually, he said, there's a pretty decent restaurant just ahead. You haven't eaten, right? Want to join me? It was a simple invite from an old classmate, no reason to refuse. I agreed with a smile. After parking the car, he told me to wait for a moment. Not long after, he came back, pushing a wheelchair. He gently helped me into it. When we ordered, he carefully picked dishes that were easy for me to eat. For the first time in 5 years, someone treated me with such care. I couldn't help asking, Simon, are you always this kind to everyone? His eyes flickered, and I saw a trace of nervousness. Of course not. I'm usually too busy to even breathe. I chuckled. He relaxed. Finally ran into an old classmate over here. And you tease me the second we meet, with jokes and small talk. It felt like we had picked up right where we left off after graduation, 5 years ago. After that night, we kept in touch much more frequently, worried that I'd feel lonely. He even introduced me to fellow expats from back home, some of whom were influential figures helpful to the project. The work I'd taken on was progressing far more smoothly than I'd expected. Bit by bit, I began to notice Simon's subtle attentiveness. I could tell he treated me differently, but considering my current situation, I didn't say anything to break the unspoken tension. That evening, after I got back to the hotel, the front desk called to say someone was looking for me. I stepped out to take a look, and there was Zack. He'd followed me all the way here, unshaven. His beard covered half his face. He looked worn down and defeated. Elise. He looked at me bitterly as I stepped out from the warm glow of the lobby lights. So close, and yet so far. It had only been half a month, but it felt like a lifetime ago. The me now, fiercely chasing my career, was a far cry from the girl who once thought only of him. Elise, he said softly. If you won't go back, then I'll stay here with you. Don't worry, I won't interfere with anything. Just seeing you is enough for me. He let out a long sigh. I looked at him, irritated. Zack, don't you have a company to run? What are you doing here stirring up trouble? His head lowered, the corners of his eyes red. The company doesn't matter compared to you. I can explain everything about Roma. I miss you so much. Elise, please, don't push me away. No matter how I reasoned with him, he remained stubborn. Eventually, I stopped bothering. I turned and walked away. He silently followed me, asking the front desk to open the room next to mine. That night, I lay in bed, restless and sleepless, thoughts churning endlessly in my mind. Chapter 7. Back in college, my family didn't have much. I supported myself through part-time jobs just to get by. One evening, I got home late after handing out flyers, worried I'd be locked out of the dorms. I took a shortcut through a deserted alley. That's when it happened. 2 sleazy men cornered me. They wouldn't let me go. I was terrified. Just as I was about to give up hope, Zack appeared, like a godsend from the heavens. From that moment on, I was hopelessly in love, utterly devoted. The next morning, I washed up and headed to work. Zack followed, keeping a careful distance. Only when we reached the office building did he finally stop walking. Before long, my desk became the drop-off point for breakfast. Milk tea, and snacks, one after another. My coworkers were whispering, clearly amused. I couldn't help but laugh, coldly, bitterly. Even here, abroad, he still wouldn't leave me alone. How dare he cheat on me, and still expect my forgiveness like it was some kind of birthright? Why was it so hard to live the peaceful life I wanted? I gathered all the food and walked straight outside, right in front of Zack's face. I dumped everything into the trash. Are you ever going to stop? Will you only be satisfied once you've driven me insane? He looked like a scolded child, murmuring weakly, I just thought you might not have had breakfast. That only made me more irritated. Zack, let go already. Don't make me lose every ounce of respect I had left for you. You think the only things I saw were what I sent you? I know exactly what you did with Roma at the office on our wedding anniversary. How ironic. Our anniversary just happened to fall on her birthday. That day, Zack left me to be with her. And that same day, I discovered the hard proof of his affair. Zack's face turned pale in an instant. He staggered, unsteady on his feet. Elise, do you need help? Simon had just gotten out of the car and immediately sensed the tension between us. He stepped protectively to my side, his gaze sharp as it locked onto Zack. Long time no see, senior. When Zack saw Simon, his gloomy, defeated expression suddenly shifted into fury. You? What are you doing here? It was you, wasn't it? You manipulated Elise into coming abroad. She's never had a mind of her own. She'd never think of leaving the country just to avoid me. It has to be you, you scumbag. He swung a punch at Simon, aiming straight for his face. Simon barely dodged it, but he wasn't ready for the second one. Zack's fist landed on the corner of his mouth, sending him stumbling back a few steps. I rushed forward and stood in front of Simon. Then, without hesitation, I slapped Zack hard across the face. Zack, enough. Stop blaming other people for your own mistakes. Zack looked at me in disbelief. His eyes clearly filled with pain. Simon, behind me, let out the tiniest hint of a smile. Elise, you hit me, for him? You never used to be like this. You used to. Yes, used to. My love for you vanished the moment you kept hurting me, again and again, for Roma's sake. You feel wronged now because I slapped you? What about when you pushed me into a lake? When you humiliated Celine at the restaurant? When you hit me at home just to defend Roma? Zack, just be human. His face twisted with guilt, and he had no words left. After that day, Zack finally stopped bothering me, but he still refused to return home, until Roma showed up. And the moment she saw me, her face twisted in rage. You filthy whore! You just can't stop seducing Zack. Can you? Go to hell! A knife gleamed coldly in the light as she pulled it from her coat. I stood frozen in place, unable to move even a step, watching helplessly as she charged at me in a frenzy. Chapter 8. Elise. Two voices screamed in unison beside my ears. The blade was just about to pierce me, but a pair of strong hands grabbed it midair. Simon pulled me swiftly out of danger. Seeing that I was safe, Zack let out a breath of relief. Then he exploded, lifting his bleeding hand that had caught the blade. Blood dripped onto the floor, and he turned on Roma, raining blow after blow on her. Roma screamed in pain, falling to her knees, begging for mercy. After the beating, Zack turned to me, crying and laughing all at once. Is it really impossible, between us? I looked at him coldly, said nothing. He gave a twisted, broken smile, more painful than crying. I get it now. I deserve this. I brought it all on myself. Then he turned pleading eyes toward me again. Elise, please don't call the police, okay? I'll take her back to our country immediately. We'll never show up in front of you again. Simon, furious, shouted, "Get lost!" And at last, those two disappeared from my sight. Maybe it was the trauma. That night, I started having nightmares. In the dream, Zack was holding Roma, looking at me with contempt. Elise, how dare you bite the hand that fed you? You think a child can trap me in a marriage you forced yourself into? The dream shifted. I was falling into the lake from that day, Tongshin Lake. But this time, the water was bottomless. I flailed, screaming for Zack to save me. He stood on the shore, watching, doing nothing. Again, the scene changed. Now I was back in that dark alley. The fear was suffocating. I couldn't even see clearly the face of the man who was fighting off the thugs beside me. Panicking, I heard someone shout behind me, "Zack!" The man next to me turned at the sound. In that moment, under the dim, flickering streetlight, his face slowly came into view, and I saw, it wasn't Zack. It was Simon, identical to Simon. I jolted awake from the nightmare, hands trembling. I couldn't wait a second longer. At 4 in the morning, I called Simon. The phone only rang once before it was picked up. His anxious voice came through immediately, but I couldn't make out a word he was saying. I just asked, over and over, one thing. 10 years ago, was it you who saved me? The line went dead silent. Only his soft breathing remained. I clutched the phone tightly, as if it could bring me closer to him. Nervously, I waited. Then, a quiet mem. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor. My mind went completely blank. Moments later, rapid knocking came from the door. Simon appeared, drenched in sweat, at my threshold. The confusion in my heart finally cracked wide open. I threw myself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. That unspoken tension between us vanished in an instant. Chapter 9. A few days later, I received a package from back home. Inside was the signed divorce agreement. But it wasn't just that. Zack had transferred the majority of his company's shares to me. I raised an eyebrow, neatly signed my name and handed it over to my lawyer. Simon wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. Elise is a rich woman now, so when are you giving me a proper title? I turned my head slightly. That depends on your performance. He chuckled low in his throat, then pressed a kiss to my lips. Light and tender, you little heartbreaker. Even though I no longer needed to work for money, I still poured my heart into my job. The stars never disappoint those who chase them. Our project was completed successfully in record time, and even won a prestigious design award. Mario, now cradling his 1-year-old baby, joked. So when do we get to drink at your wedding with Simon? I laughed. Soon, very soon. Next to me. Simon's eyes lit up, bright and full of joy. The very next day, Christmas Eve, Simon booked out an entire romantic restaurant, holding out a carefully chosen ring. He got down on one knee and proposed. Fireworks burst across the sky. The crowd around us erupted in cheers, looking at his hopeful face. I smiled and nodded. When I went to try on wedding dresses, I happened to glance out the window and saw a disheveled, lonely figure watching from afar. For a moment, I was transported back to that day, years ago, when I'd picked out a wedding dress alone. Simon noticed my distraction and immediately got jealous, so I wrapped both arms around his neck and kissed him deeply. Having you by my side is the best thing in the world. The sulky expression on his face instantly vanished. On the wedding day, my bridesmaid, of course, was Celine. She arrived 2 days early, and we shared a hotel room the night before. That evening, she nudged my arm, eyes twinkling with gossip. "Wanna hear what happened to those 2 scumbags?" Chapter 10. I looked at her, amused. She beamed, ready to spill the tea. After Zack brought Roma back to the country, he pulled some strings and had her committed to a mental institution. Inside, she was abused so badly, she nearly went mad for real. She kept begging Zack to let her go, but he didn't budge. Then one day, during a shift change between nurses, she escaped. But since she'd been caught with a weapon overseas, she didn't dare go to the police, let alone face Zack again. She could only live in hiding, drifting from place to place. But after being pampered her whole life, she couldn't handle it for long. She went crawling back to Zack, groveling for a chance to survive. So Zack made her work at his company as a janitor, just to crush what little dignity she had left. But for 2 or 3 months, Roma stayed quiet and obedient. Zack let his guard down, and one night, after drinking too much, he didn't see it coming, she drugged him, in front of everyone, to protect the company's stock price. He had no choice but to marry her. Roma thought her suffering had finally paid off, but what she didn't expect was that every night after, Zack brought other women into their home, right in front of her, sometimes even call girls. He never touched her again. Roma lost her mind. She screamed, cried, threw tantrums. Zack? He just looked at her coldly and said, "If you can't take it, then divorce me." She broke down again, and once more, was sent to the psych ward. Celine leaned closer, eyes glinting. "And guess what? The day after you went to try on wedding dresses, Zack returned home, completely out of it. He got drunk at a bar, picked a fight with someone, and was hit right where it hurt the most. He lost the ability to have children." After Celine finished telling me, I quietly took out my phone and checked the stock price of his company. As steady as ever. I felt relieved. On our wedding night, Simon was relentless, each move more forceful than the last. And I surrendered in defeat, whimpering for mercy. As I felt his overwhelming strength, I still managed to ask, "That day, why did you let Zack hit you in the face?" Simon paused for a moment, then whispered into my ear, panting with laughter. "Pity tactic." I gave his side a playful pinch in retaliation, but it only seemed to excite him more. He moved faster. A year later, our daughter was born. We named her Sophia. At her 1-month celebration, our lawyer arrived with a package. Zack had transferred all of his remaining company shares to Sophia. After that, there was no more news of him. Life is short, but with peace, it becomes long and full. Thus began a brand new chapter of happiness for our little family of 3.